there, welcome to the channel. This is Nerd.World. Today I'm continuing in my Captain series, and this time with the legendary, the one, the only Captain Hikaru Sulu, commanding officer of the USS Excelsior NCC 2000. One of the first, if not the first, Excelsior class starship in Starfleet. Before we get started, the usual, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below, as it all helps the channel. And also, possibly, if you feel like it, check out my other two channels, Nerd.World Films and Nerd.World History. They are linked in the description below. And with all that said, let's get started on the life and career of Hikaru Sulu. Hikaru Sulu was born in the early 23rd century. He would attend Starfleet Academy in his early life, training to be a pilot in the 2250s and 2260s. He would serve on a number of outposts, initially serving on Earth itself before eventually being assigned to starships, eventually landing himself the chief pilot aboard the Constitution-class USS Enterprise in 2265 under the command of Captain James Tiberius Kirk. Later, by 2266, he was a member of the command staff and would continue to rise through the ranks upon many adventures across time and space under the command of Kirk and under other captains such as Captain Decker, who would command the Enterprise and Sulu during the events of the motion picture and the contact with the V'ger probe. It would be a number of years, in fact decades, before he would officially be given a command of his own, when he would be given command of the USS Excelsior, which brings us to his captaincy. Assuming command of the USS Excelsior, vessel which had made an impression on him a few years earlier when he first saw it in space dock, when the vessel was still an experimental prototype transwarp vessel. A transwarp system didn't work, but the vessel itself was perfectly fine, and was the beginning of a lineage of starship class that would be legendary and was still in operation 100 years later during the Dominion War. In 2290, he assumed command of the USS Excelsior. The first assignment they were given was a 3-year mission, cataloguing and exploring gaseous anomalies deep in the Beta Quadrant. This took 3 years. As they were returning back to Federation space, Sulu, who generally was a fairly relaxed, very competent and loyal officer, was basically relaxing on the bridge of the Excelsior, having a cup of tea, when the vessel was hit by powerful shockwaves, which were a result of the destruction of the Klingon industrial moon of Praxis. This was the beginning of a chain of events that would lead Sulu to disobey orders directly from Starfleet out of loyalty to his former crew, jeopardizing his own vessel and engaging in hostile activities with the Klingons. Mr. Sulu, I see they have finally given you the captaincy you deserve. Thank you, gang. Do not let it end prematurely. We see, both from the events of 2293 after the assassination of Chancellor Gorkon, and through the retrospective eye of Lieutenant Commander Tuvok aboard the USS Voyager, who was a young ensign, rather young crewman I believe, actually aboard the USS Excelsior. What exactly happened? The Excelsior for the most part stayed out of things, but as soon as Sulu learned that Kirk and McCoy had been thrown in Praxis, he came defying orders to aid his former captain, his crewmates, and the rest of the crew of the USS Enterprise. They, to save time, would bisect Klingon territory, running into an old friend, a Klingon named Kang, who they would end up in a minor altercation with, even though Kang had nothing to do with the assassination attempt or anything else as far as we know. The Excelsior would arrive at the fortuitous time while General Chang was currently engaged in battle with the USS Enterprise A. Both the Excelsior and the Enterprise would eventually overpower the Klingon general and destroy his ship with a barrage of photon torpedoes. The two vessels would sail off into the sunset together. The Excelsior would carry on having a long and fruitful career, while the Enterprise was going on to be decommissioned. Sulu, of course, practically needs no introduction. He's a legendary Starfleet officer that even by the time of the 2350s, 2360s, he's still an honoured officer in the annals of Starfleet history, with a holographic visage of him at Starfleet Academy, or Starfleet headquarters more accurately, which would be viewed by a future captain of Starfleet, Captain Catherine Janeway, who would note that the Sulu she saw in the flashbacks of memory from Tuvok and the holographic image at Starfleet were not exactly quite the same, with Tuvok remarking that holotechnology in the 23rd century was not as accurate, or would not create as accurate a representation of the subject matter as 24th century versions would do, as the technology was a little bit more crude. All the same, he is remembered. He is honoured as one of Starfleet's greatest captains, greatest explorers, and greatest officers. He was noted for his tactical skill, his diplomatic prowess, and for his controlled and reserved demeanour. His personal life, he would have one daughter who would go on to serve in Starfleet aboard the USS Enterprise B as chief helmsman, Ensign Demora Sulu, who would later be encountered by Captain Scott and, of course, Captain Kirk on the commissioning ceremony of the Enterprise B. Exactly who her mother is not known. It's never been depicted or explained, except in the alternate JJ verse, where it turns out she was adopted by Sulu and his gay partner, which was something, side note, out of universe that George Takei found quite offensive. It basically implied that being gay was a choice, that just because events were slightly different in that universe, that version of Sulu would be gay, whereas his portrayal of Sulu was always one of a heterosexual male. So, although this was done to honour, or at least the writers and producers thought it was to honour George Takei, he personally found it offensive. But that is the closest thing to any canonical explanation as to who her other parent was. So as it stands, we maybe assume that Sulu was bisexual and had a male partner, and Demora was adopted and happened to take his surname. Who knows? Or maybe her surname is hyphened and she just chose to be Sulu. But that's a debate that I'm not getting into. I don't think it really matters who both her parents were. Her father was Sulu. And that pretty much sums up his captaincy. Of course, this is not a full biography or breakdown of every event in his life and his history. Things like how he was a professional, or at least a very competent swordsman, etc., etc. These things are not really relevant to this. As a captain, he earned distinctions and medals through his command and love of his crew, who were extremely loyal to him and respected his command. And he would go on to influence and train many cadets and future officers in Starfleet for decades to come, as far, as I said, forward as Captain Janeway, Captain Picard, and others who would look to this man as one of Starfleet's greatest captains. So that's the end of this video. If you want to tell me in the comments down below any other captains you'd like to suggest I do from Starfleet. I am currently avoiding the big ones. I wanted to do some of them, which is why I touched on Sulu. I'm not going to do Kirk or Picard just yet, or anyone like that. But if there's any other high-ranking captain, officers, whatever in Starfleet you'd like me to do a little profile of, put it in the comments below. Otherwise I'm just going to keep thinking up my own and keep doing these videos. Like, share, subscribe, comment down below again. And bye-bye.